Welcome to Gold Derby. I'm senior editor Denton Davidson here with three-time Emmy nominee Doug Prey, director of the Love Lizzo documentary streaming on Max. Doug, Lizzo, one of the biggest stars in music right now. How did you link up with her and come up for the premise of the documentary? What was that story you wanted to tell?
Well, it's interesting. The project came to me. I didn't sit there one day and say, oh, I want to do a doc about Lizzo. The project came to me. I'd been working with Ryan Croft at Live Nation on a series, and it was when they were developing this story. It began as just documenting her tour, her 2019-2020 tour. And I wasn't even involved in the beginning. There was a woman named Zuri Obi who did a beautiful job filming and just kind of fly on the wall camera with Lizzo almost every day of that tour. And some of the interviews in the film now came from that period of time, like just like some of the very intimate interviews where she's like lying on her hotel bed or talking about, things she's going through. And that became, as time went on, it really, I got involved first as editorially as somebody was like, hey, can you come in and look at this edit and like help us out, it needs direction. And really got more involved as a director, realizing it just needed a little bit more shaping. I was very honored to be basically hired by Lizzo and her team and the companies involved to tell the story of Lizzo. And I wasn't like a massive fan, but I certainly knew her music and I loved it. And I've done a lot of different music projects, and I've never thought that I had to be like an insider fan. I kind of like being an outsider a bit because I think it gives you sometimes there's a downside to that, but it gives you, and you can ask kind of really obvious questions that are like, wait, why are you writing these songs? Or what, really elemental questions, which have always helped the stories I've told a lot, is just kind of getting down to the basics of curiosity and why people are motivated to do the things they do rather than the details of like a song or like, what's that one lyric or something. So anyway, like I said, this was in winter 2020. I got involved and we were basically, the whole idea was let's go to Houston and film the largest show she's ever done, which was the Houston Rodeo.
Yeah.
It was like this arena stadium show, and she was super pumped up about it and excited. And I was like, this is perfect. We're going to go film the show. We'll get some interviews, and then we'll just edit in the spring, and the film will come out that summer. It was March 2020, so you know the rest of the story.
Right.
Basically, COVID hit big time right when we were there. Like that, right when we were filming was exactly when all the headlines hit and everything was shutting down, and NCAA canceled March Madness. All that stuff happened that day or those 2 days. And we were there and she got the news like, oh my God, this thing's canceled. And then from then on, for the next 2 years, it became a totally different creative adventure. Partly thanks to COVID, partly thanks to just what she was going through and realizing, okay, she's not going to tour this summer and her album is going to take longer to make. So she went on to a very internal personal journey for the next couple of years. Me as a filmmaker suddenly going, oh, we don't have that concert. We don't have this stuff. We don't have all this stuff. And how do you make a doc when you can't really be in the room during quarantine, if you remember that first year.
Yeah.
So it sort of just set us off into a totally different and a different arc for both the story as well as her life. And the film sort of became about that. It really became about her finding her voice during that time, finding, what her album is. So it's, we anyway, long story short, we ended up documenting kind of three different journeys. There's the tour, there's the making of the album, but I think the most important thing that we really focused on in the end is really about sort of this idea of Lizzo kind of growing into her new life, because she had, with her first album, become a major star. And it was like, what does that mean? What are her responsibilities? Like growing into, new power and new responsibility as a spokesperson for the things she talks so eloquently about, all of that stuff. And it was kind of about change and acceptance. And, like any doc, it becomes about your subject in a much more internal way. So anyway, that's a long-winded answer to your question, but it really was a huge honor to work with her. And even though I didn't get to, I wasn't always in the room. Like some of our interviews were remote. They were like over the phone.
So did you have people from her circle of friends or team or herself just sending you footage as well throughout this process?
Yeah, there were some people on our team who are filming even on iPhone
Yeah.
stuff. I mean, it's 2023, so documentaries they can either be super pure and focused with like amazing, like the one camera, or it's like, what do we have? What's out there to tell this story? So yeah, her team gave us a fair amount of stuff. I mean, not all of that ended up in the movie, of course. There's hundreds of hours of footage that's not in the film, but a lot of that was really good. Like when she was in quarantine, it's like, well, there was some iPhone video and other camera there, just sort of capturing this idea of her just being in repose and trying to figure it out. And like we all were,
Yeah.
just in that moment, it's actually very intimate. And she's incredibly honest. She's not afraid of the camera, and she doesn't play to the camera. So when we did film with her, it was always with a very small crew. Often it was just this woman who I worked very closely with named Annika Kahn Grebstad. Often it was just her with a camera going over to Lizzo's house to just be there for like a couple hours and just capture whatever's going on. This was later on as quarantine kind of broke, and she did begin going into the studio a lot more and doing more things and got more of a social life going again. But it would be, she wasn't into the idea of like, okay, we're doing a shoot here, we're gonna do a huge shoot and have sound and three cameras. It wasn't like that at all. It was very intimate, which is a style I actually prefer. It's just because I think you get more honest reaction. I mean, even some of the interviews, her later interviews done even last summer, there was a woman named Sarah Astaire who joined us to kind of help, Lizzo. I've always told people this isn't my movie. This is not a Doug Prey film. I never claimed it was. It never was intended to be. I was honored to be helping Lizzo tell her story. So whatever the best way to do that, I was open to. My contributions were huge in editorial, and of course I filmed her many times. And we filmed concerts, and I was with her and did a number of interviews. But like last summer, we really wanted to make sure she was, you know, in that zone. And so Sarah Astaire was brought on to do a series of very intimate interviews with her that I really appreciated, and they were great. So it was kind of like the last 2 to 3 years were just like a mix of different approaches and different ways to deal with COVID, to deal with the schedule, to deal with the fact of how Lizzo wanted to be filmed and what she wanted to say and how she wanted to say it. And it was challenging, but it was in the end a good experience, and I feel like it all came together.
How do you make that pivot when you have an ending in mind, like the Houston rodeo, and then you say that didn't happen, so you followed her around for a couple years? How do you say, okay, this has to end? I mean, eventually you have to say this has to stop. I mean, you can't spend your whole life following Lizzo around. So how do you make that decision? Like, this is it.
Well, some of it because she's involved with the film to some degree. Some of it is a little bit in terms of like, well, hey, we have enough footage. I mean, there's always this point of critical mass, and you're like, we
Yeah.
could film for 5 more years or one more month, or we could just stop filming and say, we got to put the edit together. I think the way I find it best is you have an edit, you have a feature length film edit. It's usually not that great. Your first rough cuts are not that great. They're always kind of like, God, it's not feeling strong. There's something off here. But we have the footage, and it's that leads to knowing much more clearly what you need. In other words, my final interviews of any subject are always so much better after I kind of have the film already.
Hmm.
And it's sort of like it's like the finishing touches if you're a chef and you're in the kitchen and you're like, well, okay, everything's there, but it's still not quite tasting right. Like, so you take a bite and they're like, no, it needs more of this and that. So, I mean, in really simple terms, I think we had sort of reached critical mass, but then there's always these last few things that really, really make the difference. And so that's when you go out and do like maybe two more interviews or one last shoot. But yeah, no, there's plenty of things that near the end. You're like, no, I don't think we need to film that. We already have that kind
Yeah.
of footage. There's only so much you can put into a 90-minute story.
And you are the editor. So talk about that a little bit because you're not only then left with all this footage that you shot and your team has shot, but then we get this archival footage that Lizzo told me she hadn't even seen. Like her cousins are sending VHSs in, and she's like, I didn't even know these existed of myself. Um, so that just seems overwhelming to me to just then be sort of sitting in this pile of footage. Where do you start with that?
It is totally overwhelming. And
Yeah.
the thing people always say, why does it take documentary editors so long to edit a film? And it's like, well, you're also writing a script. How long does it take for a screenwriter to write a script? So you have to take that and then add it to how long does it take an editor to edit any feature. And then you have the whole process of stuff incoming and shifting things. So yeah, all of a sudden you get a crazy VHS tape from, was it 1999, I think, or 80? I can't even remember the exact, anyway, like Lizzo's like 11, and it's a game changer. You're like, oh my God. Because Lizzo had lost a lot of her archival snapshots and stills and any family home video that a lot of filmmakers rely on in a flood. There was a hurricane. They kind of like took out their storage locker at one point in her early life. And so she didn't have any of that stuff. So all of a sudden you get this tape and you're like, oh my God, you can see her. There's Melissa. There's the young Lizzo. And it just shifts how you change things. Like the story of her relationship with her father is a really important theme throughout the film. He was very influential and very inspiring to her and kind of tough on her too. And he passed away at a point that was really critical to her story. So we wanted to tell that. We didn't have any footage of him. And all of a sudden we had some footage of him. And it was just a little bit can go a long way where you're like, you can just see him. And that's enough for you to go, oh, I get a sense of his humor and his enthusiasm and his spirit. And you just editing is crazy because a little bit goes a long way. And I think the problem we have as documentary editors is you want to put everything in. And I never wanted this to be a 3.5 hour movie at all. I just was like, no, that's sort of sloppy, it feels to me. It's like I want to focus on her experience and her journey and her words. You want to be in her head. And it's kind of intense. I mean, I'm a fairly intensive editor, and I had a really good team working with me. Autumn D was really the main editor for the life of the project. She was on very first day, and she was my partner, editor partner. We both edited, but in different ways. We would contribute to the same story. We'd trade scenes sometimes. She would do the first cut, I'd do a cut, she'd fix it, vice versa. Also brought on Annika, who was the same woman who was doing some filming, and she's a very good editor. And then in the last 2 months, I was blessed with the very musical editing of a woman named Kimberly Brown, who, like me, is really into musical editing. Like when I say that, I mean like sound design, like intensive sound design of you're coming out of a song, but you're hearing extra music. We had the stems or the splits from Lizzo's music, which is a joy because you're able to take the beats and stretch them out you can be like a DJ a little bit and just sort of
Yeah.
kind of work transitions and work things in a very intensive way. And I love that's one reason I love editing music docs. But it's a long process. And we couldn't have also done it without the work of writer Mark Monroe, who, let me put it this way, there's almost a point in every film I've ever made where I get a little lost. I'm just being honest. Like honestly, it's like it'll be like after the rough cut, I'm like, God, I need help. I really need someone to come in from the outside. I don't care if I think I know how to make a doc. You just get lost and you need somebody to come in from the outside and go, okay, I think this is what you have. I think this is the promise of the story. And I don't think you're missing it here and here. And he came in and really helped with the structure. He kind of gave some ideas and I was all ears. I was like, let's try that. Let's just try that. Let's just try it. What's the worst case? We try and it doesn't work, and then we're back to where we are right now. But I think people know, they always talk about the heroics of finishing a film, and it always looks like it made sense when you were seeing a finished doc. But it's like, it's like talking to any screenwriter or anything. It's like there's months and months of not being sure exactly how it's going to fit together. It's a puzzle, and then you have bursts of brilliance and you're like, oh my God, this makes sense. I love this 20 minutes. Let's not touch this 20 minutes, and then of course you do. But it's just, and it's just a lot of talking to my editor, Autumn, talking with Mark Monroe. Of course, our producers have a huge say. I mean, really, like Ryan Croft and Nicole Rockland had a lot to say about like, hey, what about this story thing? Because it's all about feelings. This feels right, and of course Lizzo, and she was more involved in the very end, but having her input was really meaningful and meant a lot.
Excuse me. How did she compare to some? You've done a lot of documentaries, and as you mentioned, music documentaries. How does she compare to some of the other subjects that you've filmed in terms of did she just open up like we see on the film right away? Because she seems very honest. We learn about her relationship, which she had kept very quiet about. I love that moment where she talks about the backlash she has within the Black community, and being called a sellout. I mean, she's very open about her feelings about all of that.
Yeah.
Um, how was she as a subject, and feeling like she just opened up to you and your questions?
Well, she's super honest, and she did not ever appear to me guarded or afraid of questions that I was asking. And certainly later, when Sarah Astaire was interviewing her last summer for a couple of sessions, very, very open and willing to talk about the hard subjects like love, like race, like politics, like, I mean, she's very sensitive to a lot of the backlash she's gotten on social media. I mean, who isn't and who wouldn't be? That's what social media thrives on. And she's, through the years, she's sort of been alternately very affected by that and very sensitive to it, and also really strong against it and saying, screw that. I'm not going to be a part of that. So it's interesting to kind of, if you're blessed to be able to follow somebody through more than just a month, like for a couple of years, then you really do see the ups and downs. You see them when they're having bad days, and you see them when they're having good days. And sometimes she's just on fire in an interview, and other times, there were times when well, during COVID, during the really heavy quarantine part, I did like 7 1-hour interviews with her over the phone. Like she
Hmm.
was in quarantine and she had a good mic. And it was like, they were almost like therapy sessions. I mean, I don't mean like I'm the therapist, but I just mean, you'd be like, well, can you talk about your mother, your relationship with your mother? Can you talk about your father? Talk about his passing, talk about all the things that might seem very intimate, or like you could talk about in a therapy session. She would just really go there, and she would accept questions that I asked that might seem like stupid questions, like talk about your lyrics, talk about these words, talk about, what does that mean? What does that mean to your fans? What does it mean to me? What is it? She just is, yeah, she's really open. But it's not like some subjects for documentaries, you're like their buddy, you're their friend, you're talking to them all the time. It's not like I was calling her, it's not like I was emailing her every morning saying, hey, I had this idea. Not at all. She's very businesslike. And she's super busy. She's doing an album, she's doing a tour, she's doing a TV show, she's doing like 900 million things. And you realize very quickly, like, this is just but one thing in her life. It means a lot to her. But it's just, so that's a different relationship too. Some of my prior films, it's like, I'm really in it and I'm hanging out with people, and you're kind of, it's a different slice of life. This is more like, she's she the camera arrives, she doesn't stop and look at the camera and start, the camera arrives, like, Annika could be in the room just filming, or I could be in the room just filming, and it's not like she's stopping and talking to us. She's just gonna, I mean, she's a machine. She's really good at business, and she's really good at music. I think that's
What's
the thing I was most impressed with, is you kind of expect with a superstar, you'd say, oh, what's beneath the Teflon? Like, I'm gonna see, like, the fake phony side, and it's not there. Her music, she's, you know what I mean? Like even in music, a lot of stars, it's kind of like, did they really write these songs? Are they really, you know what I mean? Are they being put up to something? It's like the exact opposite with Lizzo. I mean, she really is gifted. I know a lot about music, and to just sit there and look at hours and hours of footage of her studio sessions, it's just kind of, it's mind-boggling. I'm like, wow, she really knows that. She knows that break. She knows that lyric. She knows this thing is going to work. And, you know, she works with collaborators, but she's definitely got it going. And I think that was the most exciting thing for me, is I felt like we're telling a legitimate story about a really legitimate artist.
Well, it was fascinating to watch. Congratulations on a beautiful film. Love Lizzo is streaming on Max, and we'll have our fingers crossed for you and the whole team when those Emmy nominations come out in a few weeks. And thanks for chatting with Gold Derby today.
I'm super honored that you had me. I'm glad you spoke to Lizzo in advance. So great. Thank you so much.